Always great to hang out with you on this weekly podcast devoted to restoring the role of God in the public square, talking about the Judeo-Christian roots of America and the West, and when we can, have a laugh along the way. Not a lot of laughs in this story. We want to dive straight in because there's so many question marks remain about the mass murderer Stephen Paddock and what happened in Las Vegas. And joining us to separate fact from fiction based on what we know so far is counter-terrorism expert and former FBI special agent Tim Clemente. Tim is a Hollywood writer and a producer, a stuntman. He's been a SWAT team leader, a firearms expert and instructor. And he joins us now from Virginia to talk about this very strange mass murder. Tim, so glad to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
Is that a security dash cam? This is my first studio to truck interview.
Yeah, well, you caught me while I was at the Home Depot picking up materials for an addition on my home, a mother-in-law suite for my wife's dear mother. Who joined
terrific. God bless America. A devoted son-in-law. Very good. Tim, I'm not an old man, but I wasn't born yesterday as well. And I have never, in all the coverage and all the facts as they seem to unfold, I've never encountered a stranger mass murder shooting before the Stephen Paddock thing in Las Vegas. It's just, when this airs, because we're not exactly live, some of what we're going to say might be slightly obsolete. But based on what we know so far, do you believe that Stephen Paddock acted alone? Is this a single lone wolf shooter, do you think?
It's really hard to imagine one individual carrying this off by themselves without other people either being accomplices or being aware. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just very difficult to believe. Ordinarily, when you have killing of this scale, think about even the guy that used the truck in Nice, France, not even a year and a half ago during, I believe, Bastille Day celebrations there, July 2016. Guy drives a lorry flatbed truck into crowds of people, manages to kill 84 innocent people and wound about 450 plus. Mm-hmm. So killing on that scale, that's just driving a truck into a crowd. And yet, I believe up to 8 individuals were arrested as part of that conspiracy. Yeah. So that was a large cell. Here we have an individual who was able to move thousands of rounds of ammunition, a couple of dozen guns into a hotel suite, take over that suite and set up basically what we would call a sniper hide. And in so doing, prepared all these weapons to be very readily accessible, go from one gun to the next gun to the next gun. And yet the cleaning, housekeeping services, the room service personnel, nobody noticed anything unusual. So did he not let them into the room for days on end? Did someone else help him hide the stuff and then set it up at the last minute? I don't know. It just seems like it's an awfully difficult task for one person to pull off. And then, of course, you have the conspiracy theories that are popping up left and right, that there were multiple shooters. There was a shooter on the 4th floor, not just on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel.
I've seen a lot of, I saw one cabbie dash cam footage with some voiceover and a couple of smartphone people began to aim their cameras at where they thought the shots were being fired. And one that I saw, Tim, I'm not sure if you saw this, clearly shows the muzzle blast is not the 32nd floor.
Well, there was what appeared to be muzzle flashes on a lower floor around the 4th floor.
Right.
But those could be reflections because I saw a Fox News interview done outside the Mandalay Bay hours later, and the reporter standing there, and you can see flashes what look like they're coming from a window in Mandalay Bay. Mm-hmm. So obviously in Las Vegas at any point in the night, there's flash lights all over the place. There's neon. You have this concert hundreds of yards away, so you don't know if stage lights are reflecting off the building. So it really is impossible to tell. Unfortunately, the cell phone videos, and I've seen some of the ones you're talking about, are very low resolution. Yeah. So the difference at that distance reflecting off glass of a reflective light and or a muzzle flash, very difficult to discern. Some of it seems to be in tempo with the rounds being fired. Some of it does not.
And he seems to go ahead.
It's disconcerting. And I believe the one video you mentioned was from a cab driver, a female cab driver.
Yes.
Talking continuously over what's happening, and she's panicked and wondering what's going on. And it sounds like the shots are coming from 2 different distances. That's a possibility.
The brother Eric obviously flummoxed and had not much to say. They didn't seem to be too close. I don't know how reliable or how accurate his depictions or speculating about his brother's gun knowledge or lack thereof. He doesn't seem to have much of a social media footprint. I think the girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley, does have a Facebook page. And her timeline is interesting too. She went to the Philippines. A big cache of mammon was sent to her. I mean, there's
definitely questions to be asked there. What was the cache actually for? What was she told before she left? What did she know about his personality and/or personality changes leading up to this event?
Mm-hmm.
These are all concerning things, and unfortunately, we have to do this all after the fact. We have to look at a guy that's now dead. We can't question him.
Yep.
So the pathological things that'll be looked at from a pathologist standpoint, actually dissecting this guy's brain to see, is there anything in there? Did he have a brain tumor that made his brain stop thinking normal?
There can
be physiological things that affect a person's thinking or the ability not to think clearly anymore.
Sure. There's the volume. Right. Did he have severe anxiety?
Yeah, you can't rule out the spiritual either. I mean, clearly it's an act of evil, and it's a senseless act of evil. And so we are here after the fact looking for something to make sense out of this. And it's senseless. That's literally the definition of senseless.
Yeah.
Something like this where an individual with zero attachment to any of these people that we know of, zero attachment to the event that we know of, zero attachment to politics, religion, any social ills. We don't know of any of that. And so it appears that he's totally disconnected from this act as a human being. But clearly he wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a rant on this, and I talk about the banality of evil. This is the great book by Hannah Arendt, and she makes the point, 6 deaths is a tragedy. 6 million deaths is a statistic. When you're talking 60 people and hundreds injured by one trigger puller, the mind literally can't take it all in. And so it just becomes a kind of a feeling of numbness. You can't accommodate it. This is wanton, irrational. Let me ask you, since you've been in Iraq and you're very familiar with the Muslim theocracy context, and you've done a lot of counterterrorism work for the U.S. government and military, is this kind of setup that he arranged consistent with being radicalized by a group like ISIS, or are there holes in that as well, or no?
It's not that there's holes in that. We can say that it's a very distant possibility looking at it logically. A 64-year-old white male who we don't know has any association to Islam or to the Muslim faith. The fact that we're unaware of that does not mean that it is not indicative of what the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
Because unlike you and I are Catholics, to become a Catholic, if you're not born into it and baptized into it, you go through an RCIA process.
Yeah.
And that's the rite of Christian initiation as adults. And it's to bring you into the faith with full knowledge so that you're going in knowingly. This is what we believe. This is what you have to adhere to if you believe and want to be a practicing Catholic.
Yeah.
That's not true in Islam. In Islam, there's the 5 pillars of Islam. One of those is the Shahada, the profession of faith.
Mm-hmm.
That's Shahada, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. That's it.
Didn't you just make yourself a Muslim?
I could have.
Some would say you did, but we'll pass by with a noble silence. Yeah.
So I'm just quoting it.
Yeah.
Now. But and that's really what it takes. And then the 5 pillars are, almsgiving, taking care of the poor and widows, trying to make the Hajj at one point in time in your life.
That's the pilgrimage to Mecca, right?
Yes, and praying 5 times a day. You're not required to go to the mosque for Friday prayers. That's not a requirement. It's not one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So this individual could literally become a Muslim in an instant, stating the Shahada. Whether he does it over the phone, over the internet, alone in his room, he could go to a public library, and I'm not trying to promote conspiracies here. I'm just saying what are the possibilities.
That's my job,
Tim. We had individuals in other terrorist acts where ISIS claimed responsibility and we could not find an immediate connection. The fact that we cannot find the connection does not mean the connection is not there. It just means there's no overt connection that is visible to us right now. And so the FBI said we have no known connection to terrorism with this individual. That does not mean there is no connection to terrorism with this individual. That's not what anybody is saying. They're just saying in our investigation to this point, we haven't found that. But what we might find down the road is that maybe this guy visited a public library regularly, used an internet connection there, used the computers there, did research, made connections to people. I mean, we've had cases. There was a story about 2 years ago in the New York Times, I believe it was, about a young girl. She was about 22 or 23 years old, grew up on a rural farm somewhere like in Iowa, living with her grandmother. And she converted to Islam in her bedroom at night by communicating with members of ISIS from her computer in her bedroom in a small mobile home in Iowa on a farm, and communicating with an individual who had recruited her to become a bride for an ISIS fighter. And she literally converted to Islam and was preparing to travel to Syria to meet her 47-year-old, overweight, balding, bearded husband-to-be. And so that sounds utterly impossible from a logical standpoint. Why does a young girl in her 20s want to go to Syria to become the bride of a terrorist?
Yep.
Who knows? She did some research on ISIS online, trying to find out. This is how it began. She was trying to find out, is ISIS really as bad as they say? Why are they cutting people's heads off? Why would anybody do this? And by trying to wrap her head logically around this illogical act of heinous murder and evil, she got swept in, and she got an individual to respond to her directly who was very friendly, nice, appealing, and accommodating to her, answering her questions in a way that made her feel closer to him than to the victims who were dying. And that's a process of radicalization that you and I cannot comprehend falling victim to, but it happens every single day.
It does happen. The human heart, in its fallenness and its need for affirmation, will do strange things. Think of this. This sounds like a more perverted or a more extreme version of the Stockholm syndrome, where victims of kidnappers begin to sympathize with the aims of the kidnappers. You know, Ted Bundy was extremely charming. If he was a complete jerk and a complete creepy guy, he would never have lured all those women into his van.
Exactly. But in this circumstance, people that are completely ignorant, searching for answers, are propagandized. And they're propagandized not to evil, toward evil, although that's what it actually is. They're propagandized to, we are victims who are fighting against oppression. Can you relate to that? Can you relate to the fact that the reason we're doing this is not because we hate anybody, it's because they hate us. And so this individual that this woman was speaking with, this young lady, was able to convince her over a period of about 6 months, and only because her grandmother, this woman's grandmother, had found out what she was planning, that this got basically terminated. And the grandmother, there was actually a little documentary done on this, and the grandmother was able to sever that relationship, albeit temporarily, because the young girl again reached out to this individual, so she hadn't been severed from that connection. So is it possible a 64-year-old man who, for whatever reason, has decided, I am going to do the most heinous act in history, I'm going to be number one on the hit list of the most prolific shooting killers in the history of America, and when I do it, I'm going out with a bang. I'll try to escape if I can, but if I can't escape, I'm going to die before I get captured. I'm not going to face trial. So it's a cowardly act in that regard. It's also a sad act, because not only did he condemn himself by the act of killing all these people, there's a possibility of redemption for that. But then committing suicide immediately afterward, the possibility of redemption is much more difficult. Nothing's impossible with God. God is all merciful, so anything's possible in that regard. You know, although he did such a terrible thing, I think we owe God our prayers for this man, in the hopes that maybe he saw the light at the last minute. But the fact that this is how he wanted to end his life on this earth, is that unimaginable? Of course it is. Well, then why be that much more unimaginable to think that he might reach out to a terror group doing virtually the same thing around the world and say, you know what, make me a member of your army?
When you mentioned he was going to go out with a bang and escape through suicide before being brought to justice, I wanted to ask you about the timeline involved as reported everywhere. So again, I'm sitting here in Southern California, you're in Virginia, I wasn't on the ground. But the time clock of this indicates 9 to 11 minutes of shooting and the chaos at the concert. And then from the first shots fired to the breaching of the door, 72 minutes transpired, which strikes me as an eternity, an awfully long time. Would it taken him, because this feeds into conspiracy theorists, right? Oh, the Illuminati is doing this. This is false flag. The FBI were paid to look the other way for long enough. For what reason, I have no idea. I'm not part of that sphere of belief. But is that par for the course? Am I misreading it? 72 minutes seems like a long time for that many weapons being fired from one window.
It is a long time, but here's the problem. You have individuals that are responsible for law enforcement agencies, those that are in charge, not the sergeants, probably not the lieutenants, but captains and above, the white shirts that are sitting behind desks while the regular officers are out on the street.
Yeah.
They clearly do not want to send individuals in to face a man that has automatic weapons and untold amounts of ammunition.
Yeah.
So the first thing is try and protect innocent lives. Get those innocent lives away from downrange, get them into a safe place if at all possible, get them to positions of cover. So you saw most of the uniformed officers responding to where the victims were being shot,
Yep.
trying to get them out of there. That's the first plan of action. The next plan of action is try and stop the shooter. That's a really difficult thing to do for an officer that only has a sidearm and body armor that covers from about here to his belly button.
Yeah.
Not very effective against an automatic weapon because that body armor is not intended to stop automatic weapons fire. It's not intended to stop rifle fire. It's made to stop primarily handguns. The National Institutes of Justice rates armor. Most body armor is level 3A or 3, which means it's handguns and only handguns. So we know an individual has a rifle. Do you want to send officers there that have no protection, literally, and only handguns to try and face that threat? And then there's also the issue of misinformation being fed to the 911 dispatchers. I guarantee they got thousands of calls with people saying, I see the shooter, he's at Caesar's Palace. I see the shooter, he's at the Flamingo. There's a shooter at the roof of, because there's flashing lights, there's music, there's noise, there's fireworks all over that city all the time.
Yeah.
And so trying to pinpoint where this guy is not as easy as it appeared to have been in hindsight.
Yeah.
I know there was an Iraq War vet that was somewhere in the Mandalay Bay in close proximity to the shooter's room. He was on the phone with 911 trying to help them narrow down
who
the shooter was. And he told his story from his home in Houston, and he was really upset. He was literally breaking down in tears saying he wished he could have done more and done it quicker.
Yeah. That's got to be also, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a horrible feeling, I'm sure. But you also have the problem of there are tactical units trained and equipped to deal with this type of situation. Those tactical units have to be assembled in most cities. They're not permanent, full-time, on-duty, 24 hours a day. These are individuals that may have had a training mission that day or may have had a drug warrant earlier in the afternoon and had gone home. They were finished. They could have been spread out all over the city in their homes, barbecuing. Who knows where they were? Yeah. They have to be assembled. Now, some teams are full-time where they'll constantly have a shift of operators ready to go. I don't know if the Las Vegas Metro PD is like that. But what I do know is once you're assembled, you have to now get to wherever this issue is taking place. And is this issue taking place on the ground or is it somewhere in the Mandalay Bay?
Yeah.
Once they determine it's in the Mandalay Bay, they have to know where to go and how to get there. And then they're also trying to prevent other innocent lives from getting endangered.
Yeah.
So they're clearing other hotel rooms, trying to get people away. Does this guy have explosives in there? So there's a host of issues that they have to be concerned with that may not have been applicable to this situation in reality, but are still things they need to worry about.
I'm absolutely not blaming, and I know you don't think of that, but I'm not blaming the police whatsoever. No, and I know the Iraq veteran and everyone else, you're living life in an adrenaline dump that people don't understand what it feels like. You've been a former police officer and you've been in harm's way many times. You know, you're not your normal self reading a magazine, listening to Perry Como. It's a very different, visceral, existential experience. And so once the gunfire stopped, that's probably when he shot himself, right? He probably didn't wait till the last second. I mean, we don't know.
If he did shoot himself when they were at the door. Now, there is an issue why he may have stopped shooting or may he reduce the rapidness of his firing, because he's using weapons that are semi-automatic to fire full auto. A barrel will melt after a few hundred rounds at full auto. Any barrel. You can run it through a 50 caliber M60 machine gun, and after several hundred rounds, that barrel will literally melt. It will be red hot from the heat of the rounds going off and the rounds going down. The friction of the rounds literally going down the barrel also disperse heat into the barrel. And a barrel will melt and become less effective over a period of minutes of firing, as will the whole receiver of the gun. You can literally melt the receiver of a gun and have it just seize up and stop working. So that may have been something that was happening with him, and that's why he's transitioning from weapon to weapon. He's reloading until that weapon is useless, moving to the next one. That's what I would imagine based on the amount of fire that I heard. So whether he ended the firing because he was forced to because of mechanical issues or he was running low on ammo, I don't know. But I do know that from what I heard the police say, that when the officers were moving down to breach the door, that's when they heard the final shot, which they believed was the suicide shot.
You're listening to The Patrick Coffin Show. We're going to take a very brief pause with a fantastic invitation for you, so don't go away. We'll be right back with counterterrorism expert Tim Clemente. Hey, I just wanted to invite you to Italy. That's right. I want you to come with me and a bus full of your closest friends you don't know yet to Italy. We're going to be in Assisi, Siena, Orvieto, and most of the trip will be spent in Rome. It's April 3rd through 12th. It's priced just right. There's lots of way more expensive and less expensive. We think this is the sweet spot, the Goldilocks pricing. If you can get there on your own, there's a different set of prices for that as well. But the main thing is, Italy is one on most people's bucket lists to go, to spend time in the Eternal City, where this hurricane of grace through time in Italy has resulted in places like the Duomo Church in Orvieto, where the Eucharistic miracle happened, which gave us the Feast of Corpus Christi. We're going to be seeing the 4 major basilicas in Rome. We're going to go to the Franciscan Bone Church, and we're going to be in Rome on Divine Mercy Sunday for 12 o'clock Mass. St. Peter's Basilica. I can't wait to get there. I want you to come. We're going to be drinking Italian wine and tasting Tuscan food along the way. Joining us for dinner, luncheon is Edward Penton, the top Vatican journalist who lives in Rome. He's from England. Cardinal Francis Arinze will join us if he's in Rome as well. He's getting up there in age, but he's still very, very fit, and he'll be joining us. And some other people will be joining us as well in Rome, TBA. So if you sign up before December 3rd, 2017, you save $100. If you pay by check before December 3rd, you pay $130, or should say, you get $130 off each ticket. Love to have you there. Here's how to do it. Connect at patrickcoffin.media/Italy. That's it, patrickcoffin.media/Italy. Once in a lifetime, prayer-filled pilgrimage to Italy. Once again, April 3rd through 12th, patrickcoffin.media/Italy. I do hope you join us. God bless and be well. Until then, see you there. We're back with Tim Clemente, former FBI special agent, the man that Esquire magazine called, what did they call you? An excellent terrorist killer, something like that? What was the money line?
I think it was an excellent terrorist hunter himself.
A hunter himself, very good. One thing I find a little bit irritating is the media war over whether we should label this a terrorism act. This is the big controversy. We got to call it a terrorism act. Well, a bank robbery is terrifying, is full of terror. Definitionally, help me out here. What ought we call terrorism?
28 Code of Federal Regulations, 28 CFR, dictates for the federal government, the FBI especially, what terrorism is. Terrorism is the threat or act of violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. That's the definition. Without knowing he has political or social objectives, we cannot say it's terrorism.
Right.
What makes terrorism is the objective. Killing someone is not terrorism. You might instill terror in people, but terrorism, and that's why Antifa was recently declared to be a terrorist organization. They are clearly trying to affect political and social change. They are clearly using threats and the actual acts of violence towards persons and property against governments and against individuals and sectors thereof of both furtherance of those objectives. That's the definition of terrorism.
Okay.
This individual could be a madman and kill thousands of people, and it still would not be terrorism without some link to a political or social objective.
Could we say the same thing about a group like Black Lives Matter, whom Sheriff David Clark said is also a terrorist group because of those notes of political and social goals as part of their MO?
Any group or any individual that uses violence, acts of violence, and violence is not just against people. In the 28 CFR definition, it says against persons or property. Mm-hmm. So those protesters that are burning cars, that are jumping up and down on top of police cars in Baltimore, in Ferguson, that is the definition of terrorism.
Smashing, hauling down statues.
Yeah, there's not a grade mark. There's not a graduation on it where it says value of property damage above X.
Gotcha.
It's destruction of property, violence against persons or property, in order to coerce the government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof. That's the actual wording from the law, in furtherance of political or social objectives. Yeah. So you cannot say that Black Lives Matter does not have a social objective and a political objective. Clearly it does. Yeah. And Colin Kaepernick kneeling down at a football game, God bless him. He's allowed to do that. The ramifications of that are that people don't want to watch him play football. Well, then that's a consequence of his actions. Right. But he's allowed to do that. It's not illegal. It's not immoral. It's not wrong. It may not be to the benefit of his football career or the NFL, but there's nothing ethically wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, the First Amendment cuts both ways.
Yeah. What is ethically wrong is when you destroy other people's property because you feel you have a grievance. It doesn't matter who you are or what that grievance might be or how legitimate it might be. I mean, think of one of the greatest plays of all time, Les Miserables. Jean Valjean steals a loaf of bread because of starvation. Mm-hmm. A justifiable act of thievery in order to survive. He still went to prison for a long time and he turned his life around, becomes an amazing man, and it's an incredible play. I try to take my wife to see it every opportunity we can because it's such an incredible story that will live on forever.
It's good for the Kleenex company too.
Yeah, but that's an act of survival. That's not an act that's not malicious. When you take it and make it a malicious act to say, you do what I want or I will do this, or you say, I am doing this because I'm going to make you do what I want. That's what a terrorist does. Whether it's ISIS saying, we want you to free our captives, we want you to get out of the Middle East, we want X number of rules, we want Sharia law around the world. Their demands are political and social change, and they use violence to try and get them. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but you look at what Dr. Martin Luther King did in his protests, and he always stood against violence. He was a peaceful protester that was able to elicit a lot of change in America and really around the world because his protests were peaceful, and they were then understood to have greater power than the violence of Antifa or Black Lives Matter or any other group.
When I first heard the news, I was with our mutual friend Matthew Marsden, and he suddenly went white in the face. I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Shooting at Las Vegas looks really bad." And then the first round of information came out that it was a country music festival. The first thought that came into my mind was Antifa, because we think of country music as a bastion of traditional American, i.e. Trump. There's that subsurface assumption that maybe there was that grievance against Trump voters, and this is a crazy man's way of getting back.
Makes sense.
It does. I know someone who was at that concert. The guy next to her lost his head. Literally, she was suddenly covered with warm blood. The bullet missed her by inches. I have another connection to a dress rehearsal that Paddock did at the Lollapalooza Festival in Chicago. He rented a room overlooking that. That was a much bigger crowd, probably a dress run, like the guys in 9/11 booked a bunch of tickets and did some dry runs. Well, I know the keyboard player of the band, The Head and the Heart. Now, nothing happened. There's no shots fired, obviously. But, Tim, I wanted to ask you about what people should do. I even hate asking this, but now we sort of have to. When I saw the footage of the people getting down, that's probably a human instinct. Get down, take cover. But that made them sitting ducks, didn't it? I mean, that's the additional layer of tragedy. Had they taken cover by exiting the area as fast as they can, rather than provide a stationary target. Is that right, or am I wrong?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. No, if the gunman is at ground level, ducking is helpful because you lower your profile, so you make the visibility of your body as a target much less. When the shooter is at a tactical advantage of a height, that doesn't help at all. The only thing that does help in any circumstance when it involves a firearm is a position of cover, and people need to understand the difference between cover and concealment. Concealment is hiding behind a bush where your body is totally obscured and can't be seen.
Yeah.
Hiding a tent, a tarp, any object that just obscures your view but doesn't protect you from the rounds coming down range towards you.
Mm-hmm.
So cover is always preferable, but concealment is preferable from being exposed. So look for concealment if that's possible, because then the gunman probably can't see you and doesn't necessarily know you're behind that object, but always look for cover if you can. And a cover is a heavy concrete wall, the engine block of a car, something that rounds will not penetrate so that they cannot penetrate you. If you'll think back to the Columbine school shooting,
mm-hmm.
most of the individuals that died at close to or directly at point blank range. They were hiding under desks, under tables, in corners, in closets. They were just seeking concealment. And when the gunman came upon them, the gunman literally put the gun to their head and killed them. And that has happened many, many times. Go back decades to the Long Island Railroad shooting. There's been many circumstances where people literally were sitting ducks because they did not have any place to take cover, and they just sought to hide somewhere. Unfortunately, in a situation like Columbine, hiding was much more dangerous than fighting would have been. And that's true in most mass shootings, whether it's at the Orlando nightclub, the South Carolina church. Hiding doesn't do you any good, and your likelihood of dying while resisting someone in a shooting incident is actually far less when you resist.
Mm-hmm.
Because
mm-hmm.
I don't care who the shooter is. I really don't care. It could be the most trained Delta Force operative, somebody that has thousands of hours of firearms training.
Mm-hmm.
When there's resistance to what you're doing, it makes you less effective. Now, a great warrior who's been in battle over and over again can get shot at and not flinch. That's absolutely true. But a 17-year-old high school student like Klebold and Harris shooting at kids is literally petrified every moment they're doing that. There's no doubt about it. They might feel like they're empowered by it, but the reality is any resistance becomes overwhelming. And that's why you see in circumstances like the church shooting a week ago, where the individual, the usher, ran out to his car after being pistol whipped, got his gun, and was able to subdue the shooter by holding him at gunpoint. That shows you the power of resistance.
That's really powerful right there. That's a powerful thing, because mentally, because you don't want harm to come to yourself, you want to be supine, you want to be compliant. That actually might embolden the perpetrator, right?
It does.
Gives a bully a free pass.
Absolutely. And they want to feel powerful over you. That's why, remember Klebold and Harris, that one of them talked to the Christian girl who said, "I feel sorry for you. I'll pray for you." And they shot her in the head. They wanted that power over someone. They want that cowering. They don't want that resistance. Mm-hmm. And if you'll also recall, during, I believe it was the Virginia Tech shooting, there was I think it was a janitor who was like 67, 70 years old that resisted the shooters, held the door closed, and was able to protect a whole room full of students just because he resisted by holding the door closed. I believe he ended up dying, was shot through the door, but everyone else in that room was saved because of that act of resistance.
Yep.
And so it literally, in these circumstances, I know people's first instinct is to run, and you should run. If you can get away, get away. But if you can't get away, if you can't get to cover, if you can't help other people get away, resisting with anything at your avail. And I mean anything.
Chair,
It literally
wrench,
does
pen.
not matter. Anything.
Yeah.
Think of the individuals in London when the knife attacks were happening, and that one was a Millbank fan, the Millbank soccer fan.
Yeah, the Millbank soccer fan, yeah. Did he hit like a pub chair
Millbank.
or something?
Yeah, he was fighting with everything he could get.
Yeah.
He was using his glass mug,
Yep.
anything he could get his hands on, and he did not die. And many other people lived because of what he did. So I just say that you don't have to be trained, you don't have to be an expert. One of the most natural human instincts is self-preservation. Use it. You have to think clearly in a situation where thinking clearly is nearly impossible. But thinking ahead in scenarios is always helpful. When you go into a new setting, look around. What are your avenues of egress should an emergency happen? And in an outdoor concert, we're basically in a flat parking lot area. That emergency could be virtually anything. An aircraft coming in that misses its landing at McCarran Airport, a truck that's battering through the barricades, gunfire, anything. Think of avenues of egress, look for them, plan for it. It only takes a minute to get self-awareness, and that self-awareness may save your life.
As a fan of Roget's Thesaurus, I know what the word egress means. For people who might not, you mean like exit strategy, right?
Exit strategy.
The shortest distance between you and out of here.
You and safety. Ingress is when you're coming in. Egress is not necessarily the same as the ingress point. You may have walked in through a tunnel, come into that area, but once you're in that area, if something happens, where do I want to be and how am I going to get there?
Right. I can say with some tongue-in-cheek that what England needs is better knife control laws. I think that would probably solve it.
I believe I looked it up not too long ago. There were, I think, 6,000 to 9,000 knifings that the Metropolitan Police in Great Britain handled, or in London, I believe, last year. And I believe glassings outnumber stabbings. And a glassing is using a bar glass, a pint glass, a beer mug to attack someone, shattering it either on them or shattering and then attacking with them.
Yep.
I believe there are tens of thousands of those in the UK every year.
Wow.
So they may have gotten rid of gun violence. They may have reduced the ownership of guns and thereby reduced gun violence. They obviously did not reduce violence. And violence, human behavior, will always be the big problem that has to be solved. Because if man wants to hurt another man, he will always find a way. And yes, there are some means that are just easier for them, but we look at how heinous and horrendous and horrific this act was last Sunday night in Vegas, and yet recall it wasn't as deadly as a truck in Nice, France.
Yeah, that's true. What are your thoughts, Tim, as a Catholic and as someone who deals with firearms and combat real-world situations, about church leaders of various Christian groups mandating or recommending that churches be gun-free zones, like keep your weapons at home? Does that not provide a soft underbelly target for someone intent on evil?
It is absolutely the opposite of what they should be doing. They should be saying to, I've had pastors, priests in parishes I attended say, I welcome any and all armed individuals to please come to Mass and be there to protect us. I never go to church without a gun, never. I won't do it. I will not attend any event in a church without a gun. And I won't because it hasn't happened as much in America, but it has happened. We saw it happen last week. It's happened throughout the Middle East, Pakistan, and other places where Christian churches were the victims of shooting attacks, bombing attacks, all kinds of heinous things.
Yeah.
I can recall in 2005, I believe, in Iraq on Christmas Eve, a Catholic church being overrun, 72 people dying. And my Iraqi partner at the time, who's a Sunni Muslim, said it was the most horrific event he had ever seen in his life. And he's seen hundreds of terrorist attacks. Because these were purely innocent people praying, and they were taken at their most vulnerable moment.
Father Jacques Hamel last year in Normandy. I don't imagine the parishioners that day believed that their pastor would be virtually decapitated inside the allegedly safe space of a Catholic church.
Exactly. And the problem is evil exists everywhere. Evil can penetrate anywhere. And to believe that we're safe, prayer can keep you safe. Yes, God will protect you with the power of prayer, but he cannot protect you against every possibility. And I am trained with a gun. My kids are trained with guns. I have friends that are trained with guns. I train people, and I tell people that, a concealed carry permit, as long as you know how to use the weapon safely and have been trained on it, is a wonderful thing to have, because it there's an expression, God made men, Samuel Colt made them equal. So God gives man equality of life, basically, but a handgun in the hands of a good person makes them equal to an evil person, stronger, more powerful, with even a more powerful weapon, because a 5-foot-tall woman with a 9mm handgun can kill Paddock or anybody else with an assault weapon.
Yep.
Because that equality only exists because she now has a chance. Whereas unarmed, what can she do but run and hide?
Sure.
There are circumstances where you can't. Imagine being in the pews on Sunday morning and somebody coming in that door and deciding to rain lead on the parishioners inside a church. It's not an impossible thing to happen, because it happens all the time. The fact that it has not happened in your church on any given Sunday doesn't mean it won't happen next Sunday. So the greatest preparation we can do is either A, set up security lines outside, magnetometers, and have a security force outside our church and make it look like you're entering, the presidential inaugural.
Yep.
Or we can prepare ourselves by being at church, being attentive, being aware, and being ready. And it's unfortunate that that's a possibility that we have to think about, but it is a reality we will live with for the rest of our life and for generations to come.
Well, I belong to the club that believes we should have universal gun control, that no one should ever have any guns. Unfortunately, in the real world, bad people have access to guns, and DUI is illegal. Rape, killing, murder, cheating on taxes are all illegal. There are laws against them, and these things happen. So this is, I know it's another conversation, but Tim, in the moments we have together, I wanted to ask you about the spiritual or the supernatural angle on events like this, because you can hear the CNNs and the Foxes and the MSNBCs, and everyone's asking the same question, why? What they're really asking, I believe, is why has God allowed this, if there is a God? Not just why did he do it, but why are events like this permitted to happen in the world, period? How do you approach that question?
Because God gives every man free will. And if you don't have the free will to do good, which is what he hopes we will do and expects that we will do, then doing evil is an opposite choice. That is a choice that a person makes. And so if you don't have the will to do good, it doesn't mean you choose to do evil, but you can also choose to do evil. And that is a choice an individual makes that, as I said earlier, may be self-damning in his case. Because not only did he perpetrate this evil on other people, he did it on himself by killing himself. And so that evil choice, that heinous act of killing those people, yes, it's sacrificing innocent lives. It's a human being that's doing that. It's not God. God only gives you the free will to act as a human being so that you can choose him over evil, but not everyone does.
Then there's the additional angle of heroism that arises in the human heart in the face of evil like that. That exactly. Without the evil, there would be no heroism. Not that you want the evil to manifest the heroism, but a lot of goodness was displayed from law enforcement, from retired PD, from ordinary folks who just said, enough of this, I'm not going to run, I'm going to stay. There were nurses and average folks that stood up and did something remarkable. I hope those stories get told, because they need to be heard.
Patrick, I'm sure you saw the movie Hacksaw Ridge.
I did, yeah.
It
Beautiful.
was one of the most violent war movies ever made. And the reason it was one of the most violent war movies ever made is because you could not tell the love story and the heroic actions of that man without seeing the horror he faced.
Yep.
So in spite of the horror, he goes in unarmed into battle. In spite of that horror, seeing all his friends and colleagues being gunned down, literally hundreds and hundreds of people, what came out of that was a call to God on his behalf and an answering from God by him, of yes, God, you tell me what your will is, I will do it. And literally in the movie, he lays back and says, I don't know what you expect of me.
Yeah.
And then the cries of wounded, and he spends the entire night rescuing. In the movie, they say 75. The stories I read, it was possibly double that number that he rescued. And so those acts of incredible humanity only happen during acts of incredible inhumanity. That's the way it works. And or acts of nature.
Sure.
But you know, it's sad that it requires those acts of heroism to happen. But thankfully it does. And the last point you should always make when a question like this is asked is this the end? Is this it? Do you believe that we end here? So
right.
Yeah, it's a ending to a person's earthly life, but is that really the end? So it might be sad that I am no longer with that person. It might be sad that that person is no longer with their family. But if it's the possibility, and you and I both believe it, that they're in a much happier place. They're now in eternal bliss, not temporary happiness.
Well, your lips to God's ears. That's a nice place to stop. Tim Clemente, I know you're busy. Back to your hardworking truck lifestyle there. How can people connect with you? You're a conference speaker, I know. I've seen you speak. If you're listening right now and you want to hear this man at your next event, parish, seminar, conference, he'll speak in a ballroom, he'll speak in a stadium, you'll speak at a barbecue, right?
I do. I have.
I've heard it said that men will cook only if danger is involved. That's why God invented the barbecue. But it's timclemente.com, right? That's the best spot between listeners and you.
Website and at Tim Clemente on Twitter.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for your time, my friend. You're a gift. Keep up the great work.
Same to you. Thank you.
All right. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?